Okay, so let's start. Good evening, guys. Welcome to the last live doubt solving session, problem solving session for the course Introduction to Semiconductor Devices, which is being conducted by Professor Naresh Kumar Imani. Just to introduce myself again, I'm Soham Lakhote, currently a fourth year PhD student at ISC Bangalore, working under Professor Gaurav Banerjee in the area of analog and RF circuits and systems. So now the plan for today's session is to just revise all the stuff that we have done till now. I don't know whether I will be able to cover all the lectures, the content of all the lectures that we have done till now. But what I will try to do, I will at least try to cover the important topics. That is the second half of the course, because the first half of the course is, somebody wants to join, yeah, because first half of the course is still okay. I mean, it is mostly like formula based questions and just a little bit of logic. So now what we will do from for today's lecture is we will start from problem solving session 7. So these are the lecture notes that we have done in our own session, right, our own problem solving sessions. So we'll quickly go through the concepts and we will also quickly go through the problems that we have solved till now, so that this will act as a quick refresher for you guys, because I know you guys have an exam coming on the Sunday, right? So I want all of you to score really good in the exam. So now what we'll do, we will start from the MOSCAP, then we will go till the lecture number 11. Why not lecture number 12? Because lecture number 12 happened on the Wednesday itself, right? So I hope that that lecture is still fresh in your mind, correct? So we will first go from lecture number 7 to lecture number 11, then we will come back from lecture number 1 and see how much content we can cover in such a short time, that is 2 hours, correct? So I hope everybody is able to see the screen. Let me just change the color of the pen. Yeah, we are good to go. So now what we will do, we will start from the MOSCAP first, right? So what we have studied in the MOSCAP is, we won't go into a lot into theory, right? Because we have already done this in our 2 hour sessions, that is the lecture number 7. Just to tell you again, this is what the structure of the MOSCAP looks like, correct? It has a p-type substrate, then it has a metal, and then we are giving a bias to a gate that is directly at the metal, and in between we have an oxide over here. So this is the structure that we first studied before studying the MOSFET transistor, because this structure is inherent inside this structure, which is MOSFET, correct? So now if you look again this diagram has been taken from the Donald Demon. Again, I don't have to explain it completely. Now we just have to see how this MOSFET works, correct? So now there are three modes of operation. One of them is the accumulation. So what you do, since you have a p-type substrate, correct? You have a p-type substrate, you apply a negative voltage at the gate. Now what happens because of this? There are a lot of holes that are present in this p-type substrate. Since you have applied negative voltage, negative charges has been deposited on the metal plate, it will attract the positive charges. What are the positive charges in the p-type substrate? They are nothing but your holes, correct? So they will be attracted towards the interface, and the direction of the electric field will just a minute, sorry, just a minute, something funny is happening, just a minute. Okay, just give me a minute, my system just this is just hanging. Just give me a minute. Okay, so now what did we studied in this lecture number 8? So just give me a second. Yeah, so now we okay, just give me a second, there is some delay. Just wait for 2 minutes, guys. What is happening? Yeah, so we are good to go. So now what did we studied in this particular lecture? It was regarding some non-idealities, right? So in the first case, we had assumed that the band bending is not present. The Fermi levels are exactly equal for both of them, but you know, for the practical case, this is not going to happen, correct? You are definitely going to have some difference between the work functions of the metal and work function of the semiconductor. So now what happens at the equilibrium? Fermi level has to align, correct? Anything can happen, but Fermi level has to align for both the cases. That is Fermi level on the metal and as well as on the semiconductor and oxide as well. Correct. So the what will happen is, since the Fermi level over here is at the lower side, so this particular section that you are seeing, it will try to move up, and this particular section that you are seeing over here, it will try to move down. So now if you just look, then if I just take this point, since this section is moving upside, then the band bending direction will look something like this actually. And this is why you got the band bending in this particular fashion over here. Correct. Now how to calculate this work function between the metal and the semiconductor? So now what you have to do, it is nothing but the difference between phi m and phi s. How can I define the phi f? So the phi m is nothing but how much work I have to do to take the electron out of what you can say, out from the Fermi level to the vacuum level. Correct. This is what we call as the work function for metal as well as for the semiconductor. If I look, my Fermi level is here and my vacuum level is here. So this is what will constitute my work function for the semiconductor. Right. Now since this is N plus poly, the Fermi level is very close to EC, so close that we can approximate EF as EC. Correct. Similarly for P plus poly, I can approximate that EF is equal to EV over here. Correct. Now phi m minus phi s is nothing but this is what this level that I am highlighting over here. This can also be defined as my electron affinity. Why electron affinity? The work function is nothing but the difference between vacuum level and Fermi level, but the electron affinity is nothing but the difference between my conduction band and the vacuum level. Similarly, you can see over here the difference between conduction band and the vacuum level is nothing but the chi SI, that is electron affinity of silicon. So when you subtract both of them, right? When you subtract both of them, so how can I write the phi s? Phi s is nothing but first of all this distance of chi SI, then this distance of Eg by 2, and this distance of EFI and DF. Correct? So when you add all of them, chi SI plus this distance of Eg by 2 plus this distance. What is this distance? EFI minus EF. What is EFI minus EF? We have already seen it is nothing but Q times phi FP. So when you subtract both of them, correct, you will be left with this particular equation. Correct? And if you do the similar exercise for the case when P plus poly is present over here, then you will get this particular equation. What changed between two of them? The only difference that changed is the value of phi m. In this particular case, value of phi m was nothing but chi SI. Over here, the value of phi m is nothing but the chi that you are seeing over chi SI plus the value of Eg. Why Eg is added over here? Because my Fermi level is now equal to the edge of the valence band, and this happened because my material changed from N plus poly to P plus poly over here. Correct? So I hope this is very much clear. Now coming to the next point, just give me a second. Yeah, now coming to the next point of the flat band voltage. So you must have seen that in the threshold voltage term, there was this term beta root psi s plus this VFB. Correct? This VFB in the previous question we were not considering because the VFB was equal to 0 and that was given in the question. But if you include the non-idealities, you have to calculate this value of VFB. Correct? So VFB is nothing but how much voltage I have to apply from my side so that the band bending that happened previously, correct, this band bending that happened previously, it will become equal to 0. Correct? And this value will be exactly nothing equal to this phi ms value. Correct? So this VFB is nothing exactly equal to this phi ms value, and you have to always include it while calculating the threshold voltage if phi ms value is not given to be 0. Correct? Apart from that, there can be some trapped oxide charges that are present in the oxide, and even they can modify the threshold voltage. We will see how they do this, right? So you can see over here, if there are positive charges that are getting trapped in the oxide, then since this is a p-type substrate, these positive charges will repel the holes near the oxide semiconductor interface. So now there is already some depletion region that has been formed. Correct? This is what sir has written over here. The depletion region has already been formed by these fixed charges. Correct. Now, so I have to apply less effort to create this depletion charge because some depletion charge has already been created, and that is why my threshold voltage actually reduces when the oxide charges are there, and that too positively charged oxide charge or positively charged what you can say trapped oxide charges are present over here. Correct. In that case, my threshold voltage actually reduces. Correct. Now, after looking at this, now we started to study about the CV characteristics of the MOSFET. Correct. Now, what happened for the case of accumulation mode? So, whatever negative voltage you were applying over here, correspondingly the holes were accumulating near the interface. Correct. So now that's why you got the charge over here. Now, how are we looking? If I apply a incremental change in the voltage, that is delta V, correspondingly, where is the extra charge getting accumulated? So now extra charge is getting accumulated at a distance of Tox. Correct? It is getting accumulated at the distance of Tox. So my capacitance over here is nothing but just the Cox prime that I had initially also. Correct? And you know why this band bending happened like this, correct? We have already explained you the reason. Since holes are accumulating, EF and dV's difference should reduce over here compared to the bulk over here. Correct? Now in case of the depletion mode, since the first of all in the accumulation the band bending is happening like this, in the depletion case the band bending should happen exactly on the opposite fashion. So that's why the band bending is happening like this, that too for the p-type semiconductor. Correct? Now where is, if I apply a incremental change delta V at the gate, of course corresponding to it my positive charges will be developed on the metal plate, but where the extra charges are getting deposited, since I already have a depletion width over here, and if I apply a extra voltage, that means this depletion width is still gonna increase further, and this is where the extra DQ charge will be coming. Now what is the distance between this charge over here and this charge over here? This is nothing but your Tox plus W depth. Correct? So this capacitance that you are seeing over here, it is nothing but the series capacitance that you will be getting corresponding to Cox and C depletion. Correct? I hope it is very much clear. Now once we go to the inversion mode, what happens? See, this depletion region cannot keep on increasing infinitely. At some point it will hit its maximum. Correct? And after that the inversion layer, the charges will start to accumulate, that is the electrons. Now if I apply incremental change delta V over here, corresponding to it, where is the opposite polarity charge getting where is it getting accumulated? Correct? It now, instead of getting accumulated over here, now since I have the free electrons with me, that is inversion charges, they will be accumulating just near the interface over here. Correct? Now what is the distance between these accumulated charges? Again it is nothing but just the Tox. Right? So correspondingly my capacitance will be nothing but just Cox. So how did it happen? So first we went from Cox to series combination of Cox and C depth, and then from there on again we just went on to Cox. Correct? So the CV characteristics will look something like this. Correct? And this is what the curve you are seeing over here, diagram taken from the Donald-Niemann. Correct? And this point that you are seeing over here, correct, this is exactly a threshold point. Correct? And after this point all the charges that are getting accumulated, so they will start getting accumulated at the interface instead of getting accumulated at the end of the depletion region. Correct? So now that's why you got these characteristics. Just do not forget the different parts. This is the threshold point, this is nothing but your accumulation region, this is nothing but your strong inversion, and the curve where it is falling, right, it is nothing but your depletion region actually. So please do not forget this. Okay? Now coming to, if you just ask me how to calculate the flat band voltage, so this was for the CV characteristics, right? One more thing that we forgot to do is to how to calculate, how to take into account the two non-idealities, that is the work function difference and the trapped oxide charges. So the flat band voltage will be nothing but this phi ms, that phi ms term that I have already told you, and this minus QSS dash by Cox. Correct? Why minus QSS dash? Because threshold voltage decreases as QSS dash increases. Correct? So that's why there is a negative sign that is present over here. Right? Now this was for p-type substrate that I have told you. Similarly you can go for the n-type substrate as well. Correct? This curve that you are seeing, it will be exactly flipped around the y-axis. Just rotate this curve. Just rotate this curve, you will get this curve exactly. Correct? Now why did this happen? Because my substrate is n-type. Correct? My substrate is n-type over here. To remove, to push away the electrons from the interface, I have to apply a negative voltage at the gate. And when I apply negative voltage at the gate, my threshold voltage will also be negative over here. Correct? I hope this why this curve got flipped around the y-axis. This explanation is very much clear. And these are nothing but just the different regions that are present inside the what you can say the CV characteristics. To identify between the PMOS and NMOS, look at the polarity of the threshold voltage. Correct? If it is negative, then it is a PMOS. If it is positive, then it is a NMOS. Correct? I hope it is very much clear. Now, the next part was the frequency dependence of the CV characteristics. Correct? So now this was the characteristics that we had looked at. Correct? This was the characteristics that we had looked at. But it assumes that there is a sufficient time for the inversion electrons to form and accumulate near this interface. From where are these electrons getting generated? They are getting thermally generated. Correct? They are getting thermally generated. And this thermal generation has a finite rate. Correct? This has a finite rate. Correct? You must have seen this GL times tau P. Correct? This is nothing but a excess carrier concentration. Correct? This generation, it is not infinite. This generation rate is a finite. Correct? So if I apply a signal at the gate which is at a which has a much higher frequency and its time period is very small compared to this what you can say this inverse of the generation rate. Correct? I mean, if you take how much time is taking for these electrons to generate, and if I apply a signal, a sinusoid whose time period is very much less than the time it is taking for the electrons to generate, that means these electrons are not getting generated fast enough, and my MOSFET, the MOSCAP will not be able to react quickly to the high frequency signal over here. Correct? So that's why this curve is for the high frequency, it is not getting on the up, it is remaining down because electrons are not being able to generate themselves at a faster rate compared to the frequency of the signal. Correct? I hope that was very much clear to you. And now let me just look at so now let me just look at the next important concept. So it was regarding the how the threshold voltage is actually dependent on the Na. Correct? So this Na is nothing but my doping concentration, the substrate doping concentration. What you are seeing over here, this is nothing but high frequency CV characteristics. Correct? What you can see over here, this at the Na equal to 10 to the power 16, my threshold voltage is here. At Na is equal to 10 to the power 15, threshold voltage is here. At Na is equal to 10 to the power 14, threshold voltage is here. So what I can observe over here is that as Na keeps on increasing, right? As Na keeps on increasing, my threshold voltage is also increasing. Correct? So what is the reason behind it? So if you just ask yourself, just give me a second. Yeah. So this is my oxide. This is my gate. Now, if I just take this area, right? Let me just change the color of the pen. If I just take this much area, correct? If I am increasing the Na, that means the number of holes that are available in this particular area, even that is going to increase. Correct? How does the depletion region is being formed? I have to apply a positive voltage at the gate to repel all the holes that are present near the interface. If the number of holes near the interface increases, then I have to apply even higher gate voltage to deplete this region of any free holes that are present over here. Correct? So now if I have to apply extra gate voltage to deplete this region completely of the holes, that means my threshold voltage is also going to increase now. Correct? This is a very simple explanation, or if you want a complicated explanation, then you can go with this particular formula. Just ignore these two terms now and just look for this particular term and this particular term over here. This term has a dependence of 2 q epsilon s into Na, and this phi p has kT by q ln of Na. Correct? You will easily see that if I increase the Na, then my threshold voltage also increases. Correct? I hope that is very much clear. Now let's move on to the important part, that is the problems. Correct? So now the first problem was regarding the flat band voltage. They are asking us to calculate the flat band voltage. Correct? They have given us the metal work function over here, and now based on given data, that is the doping concentration, the permittivities, as well as the intrinsic concentration, we have to calculate the value of phi m minus phi s. Phi s we have to calculate, correct? So the phi s value we have already seen. How can we calculate the phi s value? Phi s value is nothing but the electron affinity of the silicon plus Eg by 2 plus Q times phi fp, correct? This is what I have written over here, right? Now how can I calculate this? The electron affinity for the silicon is given to me, correct? It will be known. And now if you look at the Eg by 2, of course the Eg they have to give me, correct? And now Eg of the silicon is what? 1.12 electron volts. If they don't give you, just use this value. And to calculate the phi fp, I have to know the value of Na and Ni. Na value is given to me, the Ni value is also given to me. I will just substitute in this formula. So first of all, I have calculated the value of Q times phi fp. Once I know this value, then I will substitute it over here to get the value of psi s, correct? Once I get the value of psi s, then the question is very simple now. The value of phi m is known. The value of psi s I have calculated. The flat band voltage is nothing but psi ms, correct? Which is nothing but psi m minus psi s, correct? So once you subtract both of these, you will see that the value of psi ms will come out to be negative over here, correct? I hope this question is very much clear. Now the next question they are asking is to calculate oxide capacitance per unit area. This is very simple. It is nothing but epsilon ox by T ox. Thickness of the oxide is given, epsilon ox is given. Just divide, you will get this answer, correct? The next question is important. They are asking us to calculate the threshold voltage. We were only considering this formula, right? But since there is a non-ideality of the phi ms, we have to include the flat band voltage also over here. Flat band voltage we have already calculated in the last question, correct? Now I just have to calculate this particular term, correct? At the threshold voltage, psi s is nothing but 2 times phi fp, correct? So you just substitute psi s value as 2 phi fp over here, and phi f we have also already calculated, correct, from the last part. And so you just have to substitute all the values over here, and you will be getting the value, the final answer for the threshold voltage as this particular term. The flat band voltage has been included over here, correct? And these both terms 2 phi f and this term has been included over here, correct? Just get the answer and you will be able to get this answer easily, correct? Just follow the logic, don't look at the values right now, just see the logic, you will be easily able to get the answer, correct? Now this question was what? It came in the GATE 2016. This question is nothing but a very easy one, where they are asking us to equate the capacitance of two structures, correct? So for this structure 1, the figure 1, the capacitance is nothing but the series capacitance of two structures, that is Cx and Cy, right? And for this particular structure that you are seeing over here, it is nothing but a simple Cy capacitance, correct? Now series capacitance, you can obviously, it is nothing but Cx into Cy divided by Cx plus Cy, correct? And since this is capacitance per unit area, C has to be replaced by epsilon by T, correct? So once you do this, you will be left with this particular equation. Epsilon is known for both the structures, even the thickness for both the structures is known, that is T2 and T1 for the first figure. From over here, you will be able to calculate the value of capacitance per unit area, which will come out to be phi by 2. For this particular figure, the capacitance is nothing but simply epsilon 1 divided by T equivalent, correct? So you just equate both of these values, you will be able to find this T equivalent because epsilon 1 has been given to you, correct? So again, a very easy question. Now coming to the next problem. So so coming to the next problem, that came in GATE 2015. So in the MOS capacitor with an oxide layer thickness of 10 nanometer, the maximum depletion layer thickness is 100 nanometer, correct? So the W depth max has been given to me. The permittivities of the semiconductor and the oxide layer have been given. So they are asking me to calculate the ratio of maximum to minimum capacitance, correct? Now what is the maximum capacitance? Maximum capacitance is when I just have the capacitance of the oxide, correct? See, capacitance decreases when they are put in the series, correct? Capacitance decreases when they are put in the series. The maximum, for the maximum capacitance, I don't want this C depth to be present over here, correct? So the maximum capacitance is Cox, and the minimum capacitance will be nothing but the series combination of Cox and C depletion and the C depletion minimum. Why minimum? This can only occur when my depletion width has reached its maximum value. and that maximum value has been given to me. Correct? So I hope it is very much clear. The series capacitance of Cox and Cdip will be nothing but Cox times Cdip divided by Cox plus Cdip. The maximum capacitance is Cox. So if you just divide both of them, then you will be left with this particular equation. Correct? And so if you just write it clearly, then you can also write it like this. Now what I have to do, Cox dash, I have to write it epsilon ox by Tox. C depletion I can also write it as epsilon Si by W dip max. Correct? So when you put it over here, when you put these values over here, you will be left with this particular equation. Correct? Everything is given to me. Epsilon ox to epsilon Si ratio, W depth max has been given, as well as the thickness of oxide has been given to me. So once you substitute all these values, you will be able to get the ratio of C max to C min value, which will come out to be around 4.33. Okay, so now I am not going into significance of this because I have already explained this. We are doing this revision from the point of view of the exam, right? Not from the understanding any theoretical point. Correct? So again, this particular lecture revision is also done. Please let me know if you guys have any doubts. I will be moving on with the next lecture now. Just give me a second. This was lecture 8, right? I have to go with the lecture 9 now. Yeah, lecture. Just give me a second. Lecture 9 is here. Yeah. Yeah. So in this particular lecture, I guess we had studied about completely about the MOSFETs and all. So this is what you can see over here. Just a minute. There is some delay. Yeah. So these are all the interview questions that we had completely understood during that particular lecture, right? So now we studied completely about the MOSFET. So I will just shortly explain how the MOSFET works. So now you can inherently, somebody wants to join. Yeah. So now you can inherently see that there is a inherent MOSCAP structure that is present over here, and apart from that we have added two diffusion regions of N plus, that are source and drain, right? So now what we are doing over here is that first of all we are creating an inversion layer by operating the MOSCAP in the inversion mode of operation, and then we are applying a potential difference at these two particular terminals over here, so that the electrons that have been accumulated at the interface, they can flow between these two terminals over here. Correct? So now once this is done, what is remaining in the working of the MOSFET? See, one thing that you have to understood is, even before you do anything with the MOSFET, there is a formation of the depletion regions over here, because this is nothing but P and N plus junction. Why there is no depletion inside N plus? Because this is heavily doped, right? The depletion always occurs in the region which is lightly doped. So that's why the depletion region is present heavily over here. The depletion region on the source side is always smaller compared to that of the present on the drain side, because you are applying a positive bias on the drain node over here, whereas the source is always grounded in most of the cases. So this PN junction is always more reverse bias compared to this PN junction. That's why the depletion region is more over here. Correct? So now first of all you are applying the gate voltage, you are accumulating the electrons over here. Correct? And once the electrons have been accumulated, you are applying a potential difference at these two particular points to make these electrons flow and get a current out of this device. Correct? Now we have studied two things. So one thing that we have studied is at what region of operation this MOSFET is operating. Correct? So the region of operations were nothing but just a minute. They were nothing but the cutoff, linear, and the saturation region. Correct? When you want to operate the MOSFET as a amplifier, you operate it in the saturation. When you want to operate it as a switch, you use it in the linear mode. When you either in the linear mode or either in the cutoff mode. So when you switch between the cutoff mode and the linear mode, so you operate the MOSFET as a switch basically. Correct? So the correspondingly the current equations we have already derived for the case of the linear region over here, and for the case of saturation region present over here. Right? Now coming to the next point, how is the current actually flowing in the saturation? So now you know that the channel charge, that is the charge that is present inside this channel, is proportional to VGS minus VT minus Vx. What is Vx? Vx is nothing but the potential of the channel. Potential of the channel, and this potential varies with distance x. You are seeing x over here. This Vx varies from Vs to VDS. Vs is 0 and VDS value, it is under my control. Correct? So as you keep on increasing the value of VDS, right, the Vx value also increases at the same point over here. Correct? So if I look at this particular point and if I increase the VDS value, the potential at this particular point in the channel will also increase. Correct? Now if the Vx value increases, the channel charge is going to get reduced because Vx has a negative sign over here, and at one point you will be left with zero channel charge, because this term at some point will be equal to 0, because your Vx is keep on because if you increase the VDS, right, there is no effect on the VGS and VT, but your Vx will keep on increasing. Correct? So at one point your channel charge will be becoming 0, and this is what we defined as the pinch off point. Correct? And that point is nothing but VDS is equal to VGS minus VT. If you still increase the VDS beyond this particular point, the channel will actually shrink towards the left side. There is no channel left in this particular region, but electric field, because of the depletion region, is so strong over here that all the electrons that are present in the channel, all of them will get pulled away onto this particular side. Correct? So that is how the current is actually flowing inside the MOSFET, and these are the different region of operation. One is saturation and one is linear. One mistake that many students make is they directly use the current formula for the saturation without doing any of these calculations. That is, you have to check whether VDS is greater than VGS minus VT or not. Correct? In the question they won't mention whether the MOSFET is operating in the saturation or whether it is operating under linear. It is your job to decide it. Correct? And once you have decided it, then use the current equation formula accordingly and then calculate the value of current depending on whether it is operating under linear mode or whether it is operating under the saturation region. Correct? Now the next, just give me a second. Yeah, so this was the problem number 1 that we had looked at. What was for an ideal p-type MOSFET, choose the correct statement. Correct? So for the case of NMOS, right, I had a p-type substrate. Correct? To create the depletion, I had to move the holes away from the interface, oxide semiconductor interface. To push the holes away, I had to apply a positive voltage at the gate. That means the threshold voltage was positive. For the PMOS, since my substrate is of N type, I have to push away the electrons that are present over here. So to push away those electrons, I also have to apply a negative voltage at the gate. Correct? To push away these electrons that are present at the interface. Correct? So the threshold voltage for the PMOS will always be negative. But even though the threshold voltage is always negative, the condition which will prevail is your VG mod has to be greater than VT. It does not matter now whether your VT is positive or negative. Correct? If you want to create an inversion layer, this condition has to persist. Correct? Now once that is clear, now the next question, again it was a very simple one. They were just asking for the same overdrive and for the same width and length, the current in the NMOS will be greater than the current in the PMOS or not. Correct? If you just write these equations, since everything is same over here, this ratio of the current will be nothing but the ratio of mobility of electrons and holes. Since mu n is greater than mu p, current in the current in the NMOS will always be greater than the current in the PMOS for what you can say, for same overdrive and the same W by L for both NMOS and PMOS transistors. Correct? So the reason the statement 1 was correct and statement 2 that they had given was the correct explanation actually. Correct? Now then then this was a good problem that we had solved from the Donald Niemann book. So now in this question they had given us some parameters of the MOSFET, and now they had also given us two conditions. When the MOSFET is biased in the saturation region, the drain current is 0.132 milliampere at VGS equal to 1 volt and 0.295 milliampere at VGS equal to 1.25 volt. Now they are asking us to determine the electron mobility and the threshold voltage. Correct? So what did we do? We wrote two equations corresponding to these two conditions that have been given in the question. Correct? And now what did we do? So we have to eliminate one of the variables if we just want to find one, if we want to find one variable. Correct? So what if I just divide these two equations? Correct? What if I just divide these two equations? Mu n and mu n will get cancelled over here. This will be left in terms of the VTH only. Correct? So now if you just look at it, then you will be left with this equation, and if you just take the square root on both the sides, you will get the value of VTH like this. And once you know the value of VTH, you can resubstitute this value of VTH in any of these two equations that are present over here. You will be able to get the value of mu n from there. Correct? And that's how we got the value of mu n as well. Correct? Now the next problem that came in the gate was, it was asking us when the MOSFET is suffering from the channel length modulation. So if you don't recall, the channel length modulation is nothing but I have told you, right, the channel shrinks, it pinches off, and after a certain point the channel may also shrink, that is the channel has vanished in this particular region. So this is what we call as the channel length modulation. As VDS is increasing, your channel length will keep on decreasing. Correct? So based on this voltage, my channel length is now fluctuating. Correct? So now this fluctuation in the L, right? What was the equation for the current of the MOSFET? Correct? It is nothing but half into mu n into Cox into W by L. Correct? Into VGS minus VTH the whole square. This is valid for the saturation region. If your L shrinks now, correct, then the W by L will increase. And if W by L will increase, then my ID is also going to increase now. Correct? So what you can see is that since what we have studied in the saturation region, MOSFET acts as a current source. Correct? MOSFET acts as a current source. Why it acts as a current source? Let me just show you. You are seeing this graph. What is happening after this particular point? Despite increasing the VDS, my ID remained constant. Correct? This is the characteristics of the current source. Correct? The current is not depending on the voltage between the 2 points where that current is flowing. Correct? So the MOSFET acts as a current source, ideal current source when the channel length modulation was not there. But what happens when the channel length modulation is there? You can see that there is, instead of having a flat line like this, now I am having a slope. That is, my current is now slightly increasing with the increase in the VDS. Now this is not a characteristics of the ideal current source, because as I am increasing the voltage, my current is also increasing. Correct? So this is nothing but V proportional to I, and it is increasing linearly. So that means V is equal to IR is present. Correct? Correct? V is equal to IR is present. So apart from this flat line, I also have this V is equal to IR to be present. So now if you just model, if you just combine both of these effects, first the ideal current source and one the what you can say, the IR, V is equal to IR thing that we are seeing over here. The current is increasing as the voltage is also increasing. So you have to model this as this particular resistor. Correct? Now what you can see over here, ideally R should have been infinity, but because of the channel length modulation, R won't be infinity over here. Correct? So the model of the MOSFET will be nothing but a current source with a finite output impedance, and that is what the answer we got from here. Correct? I hope that is very much clear. So this question I had just given it as a homework for you. You just have to check what you can say, whether it is operating in the saturation or triode region, but it has directly been given the drain saturation current for a gate voltage of 5 volts. So you just have to apply this equation, just substitute all the values, you will be getting the value of this ID side. This was a direct question, right? Now the next thing that we have studied is about the substrate bias effect. So what we have studied is nothing but this substrate acts as a back gate. Correct? This substrate acts as a back gate, and now it modulates the threshold voltage. Correct? And how does it modulates the threshold voltage? So you can think of it, why did I say it as a back gate? Now if you look at the energy band diagram along this particular cross section, correct, this is my source, this is my drain, this is what my channel is looking like. Correct? Now if you increase the body, voltage, correct? Now if you increase the body voltage, now you will be suppressing down this thing. Similarly, if you increase the gate voltage, you are suppressing down this. I mean, this will look something like this if you increase the gate voltage or if you increase the body voltage, correct? Since increasing the gate has the same effect as increasing the body, that's why we called it as a back gate effect, correct? And now your threshold voltage is also going to get modulated because of this, because not only I can create the depletion from applying a voltage at the gate, but I can also create the depletion by applying a voltage at the body also, correct? That's how you can see that the threshold voltage has now been modified over here, correct? I hope it is very much clear to you. And now okay, so this is exactly the same thing. Just a minute. Yeah, so just do not forget this formula, okay? Some questions may be asked in the exam. If any question comes on the substrate bias effect, maybe numerical or maybe some MCQ type question, correct? So now again I am not going to go into this because this is a directly formula based question over here. You just have to look at the formula and you just have to see whether the statements they have shown over here, whether they whether it is true or not, correct? So now this question was again a very formula based direct question, that's why I have not solved it over here. So they are just asking us to calculate the body effect coefficient, that is the gamma value. This is what is gamma value that you are seeing over here, correct? So they are asking us to calculate this first. So it is very easy, everything will be given to you. You just have to put the values and get the value of this particular term over here, correct? Now coming to the important part of the subthreshold conduction, ideally what we were expecting is that we were expecting when the Vg is less than Vt, the MOSFET is completely off and there won't be any current that will be flowing, correct? But practically that does not happen. Why that does not happen is, see, Vt is a point where you have reached the inversion, correct? But if your Vg is less than Vt, still some electrons are there. It is not like your substrate is what you can say has become p-type. You are seeing over here your EF. If I look at this particular portion, my EF is still higher than EFI, correct? What does this mean? Near the interface my substrate is still n-type, correct? That means some electrons are present over there. So if I just what you can say, if I just have Vg maybe equal to Vt minus delta, where delta is very small value, you can see that still electrons are present over here. So there is obviously some current that will be flowing, and that current we called as a subthreshold current, correct? And now you can also see it from this energy band diagram as well, correct? So the energy band diagram has been drawn over here for the case of accumulation, the weak inversion and the inversion. So for the inversion, you can see there actually exists a very small barrier from the source to channel. So that means all the electrons from the source can actually start moving into the channel very easily, correct? In the case of accumulation, just look at the barrier height, it is so much increased, correct? There is very low current that will be flowing in such a case over here. But in the case of the weak inversion, the barrier height is still small enough that some electrons can pump up from the source to the channel and they can constitute a current now, correct? And this is what we have seen over here, that current is not the square law, it is actually dependent in the exponential manner, correct? And how did we define the unit? So we defined something called as a subthreshold swing. Its units were nothing but millivolt per decade. That means how much voltage I have to go below Vt to get a decadal change in my current, correct? That means if I want to reduce my current by 10x, how much Vt should be reduced? How, not Vt, how much Vgs should be reduced below Vt, correct? This is what this subthreshold swing is actually telling us, correct? So now this value, if you calculate, it will come very close to 60 millivolt per decade. Now from where did this value came? If you just look at this equation and you go by this formula, you increase the current by 10x or reduce the current by 10x, correct? So the sir has increased the current by 10x and correspondingly he has applied a dV change over here, correct? Now from both this equation 1 and 2, you have to substitute one of these equation into other, and then you will be able to get the value of the subthreshold swing, correct? The subthreshold swing is again nothing but 1 upon dou ID by dou Vg. Correct? Do not forget this. This is my subthreshold. Correct. I hope this is very much clear to you. Now coming to the next part. Yeah, so this was the important numerical that we had covered for the subthreshold current of the MOSFET. Correct. So ID equation has been given, the subthreshold current equation has been given, and now what did they ask us is there are 10 to the power 6 identical transistors on a chip, and all of them are biased at the same VGS value at VDD equal to 5 volts. Correct. Now they are asking us to calculate the total current that must be supplied to the chip at VGS equal to 0.5, 0.7 and zero point 0.9 volts. So first of all, what you have to do, you have to substitute VGS equal to this 0.5, 0.7, zero point 0.9 in this particular equation and get the value of ID out. Correct. This is what we have done. For 0.5 and zero point 0.7 we got the value of ID this, and we also got the value of ID like this. Correct. Now to get the total current, since this is the current of only one transistor, there are 10 to the power 6 such transistors that are present. So if you multiply this by 10 to the power 6 and this by 10 to the power 6, you will get this value. Correct. You will get these two values. Now the next question that they had asked in the same question is calculate the total power dissipated in the chip for the same VGS values. So what is the power dissipation? Power dissipation is nothing but VDD times ID. Correct. VDD value I know, ID total ID value I have already calculated. Correct. This is the total ID values that I have already calculated. So now if I just multiply both of these values by the VDD, correct, then I will be getting two values now. One is this particular value and one is this particular value. Correct. Again a easy question, nothing tricky was asked in this particular question. Correct. So I hope till this point it is very much clear. So we have also went through this particular lecture number 9. Now we will be going with the lecture number 10 now. Just a minute. Please feel free to ask me if you guys have any doubts now. I won't be able to read the chat section. Just a minute. Yeah, so now I guess in this particular lecture we have seen about the scaling of the MOSFETs and all. Just give me a second. Yeah, so we have seen about the scaling, and just a minute, let me go to the important slides. Yeah, so in this particular this table is of very much importance. We are doing the constant field scaling. So what do I mean by constant field scaling? You reduce both horizontal as well as the vertical dimensions and ensure that when you are decreasing the size of the MOSFET, right, the field inside the MOSFETs do not change at all. Correct. So now what are we are doing? We are modifying all the dimensions, device dimensions by the factor k, where k is less than 1. Correct. We are increasing the doping concentration by the factor 1 by k. Since k is less than 1, 1 by k is greater than 1 over here. Electric field remain as it is. Correct. And the capacitance, you can calculate what happened to the area over here. So this is capacitance. You can also calculate the capacitance per unit area. So if you calculate the capacitance per unit area, since the thickness is going down, your capacitance will actually go up. Correct. And in this particular equation, if you calculate, since your width and length both are getting scaled by k and your thickness is just getting scaled by k, so k square by k will be just becoming k over here. Correct. And now important are this power delay product and this what you can say the circuit delay time. Correct. First of all, you have to see what happens to the current. Correct. You have to see what happens to the current, and then you also have to see what happens to the capacitance. Capacitance, we have already seen it increases by the factor k. The current, I will just leave it as a homework. Just take the current equation of the MOSFET in the saturation region and just see what happens over there. You will be able to get to this particular point. Correct. Now coming to the next important point, just give me a second. Yeah, so now this was the trade-off that we were actually looking at. first from the subthreshold slope, right? From the subthreshold slope, we understood that to get a substantial difference between the on and off current, I have to reduce the gate voltage at least maybe 180 or 200 millivolt below the threshold voltage. Why did I say like that? Because I at least want some thousand, or I at least want 10,000 times difference between my on and off current. Correct? If I want this decade to be 4, like 4 means 10 to the power 4, correct? Then this number will be coming out to be 240 millivolt. What does this mean? If I want to turn off my MOSFET, I have to at least make sure that if my threshold voltage is 400, correct, if my threshold voltage is 400, then my gate voltage in the off condition at least goes 240 millivolts below this 400 millivolts, correct. That means 160 millivolts, correct. Only then I can ensure that my off current is 10,000 times smaller than my on current, correct. So now this is good. I mean, so for this particular condition, what I want, if I have a very low value of Vt, let me just show over here, correct. If I have a very low value of Vt, for example 100 millivolt, right, then I don't have that 200 millivolt room to go below the Vt, because I cannot go below the ground voltage of 0, correct. So if I take a very low Vt, there is not a lot difference between the on and off current. But if I take a very high value of Vt, correct, then my on current is going to be reduced because my Vt value is higher, correct. So there is an optimum value of Vt that actually comes up. You don't want Vt to be very high and you don't also want Vt to be very low. Now let me go on to the next important slide. Yeah, so this was very important. Let me just turn on the in color to maybe blue. Yeah, so now this was regarding the long channel and the short channel MOSFET, correct. What you are seeing over here, if you just look at this graph and this graph over here, so I will tell you 2 or 3 comparisons, correct. So now if you join all the points after which this curve is becoming saturated, correct, if you join them, they will join in a parabola fashion. But if you join them over here, first of all, after this particular point, the current is remaining flat, correct, the current is remaining flat, but over here you can see some slope is there. You can see some slope is there. So now definitely this is happening because of the channel length modulation, correct. You can see that instead of this parabola, the current has now saturated at this particular vertical point over here itself. So now some kind of saturation is happening, and this saturation of the current is happening because of the effect we have studied called as the velocity saturation. One more thing that we have studied is, you can see this difference is increasing. The value of A, B and C, it is increasing in a quadratic manner. But if you look at this particular same A, B and C, correct, this is not a quadratic increase, this is just a linear increase. Again, this is happening because of the velocity saturation, correct. So we have seen this. Now from this graph itself, we have identified channel length modulation as well as the velocity saturation effects. And one more thing that I want you to highlight is, if I look at this current, see, both of the W by L ratio of both of them is exactly same, correct. So I should ideally expect that I should get the same current for this particular VGS, right, for this particular VGS. But if you look at this current, it is hardly coming out to be 50 microampere. Over here, if I look, just give me a second now. Maybe I am not doing it correctly. I guess I should go to this higher curve. Yeah, just look at this curve. Just ignore this particular curve. If you go for this particular curve, right? If you go for this particular curve, then its value is coming to be around something like 160 microampere. And if you go for this particular curve, this value is coming out to be something like 300 microampere. So you can see that current is not capable of going till its maximum value. And again, this is happening because of the saturation, the velocity saturation, correct. So now what is this velocity saturation? So if you just look at the electric field versus the drift velocity, we were initially, for the long channel MOSFETs, we were operating in this particular region, correct. But now since the channel length has now reduced, right, and you know that after a certain point the carriers cannot move beyond a particular velocity even if you keep on increasing the electric field. Now we have hit that velocity, and now despite increasing the electric field, my carriers cannot travel with more speed now. Correct. So now this is what has led to what you can say the saturation value in the current. My current, instead of reaching to its full potential, now it is saturating at some lower value. You can see over here from this curve. Correct. It is saturating at some value over here compared to this particular case of the long channel MOSFET. Correct. So this velocity saturation, even though it may seem that carriers are traveling at a full speed, it is a very bad effect. It won't allow your MOSFET's current to go till its full potential. Correct. And that is a very bad thing to happen. Now coming to this channel length modulation, now if we try to derive it mathematically, I mean why are we having this slope over here, then you know that my L is actually reducing from L to L minus delta L. Correct. Now if you just put this L and L minus delta L and divide the two current equations, that is ID dash and ID, you will get this particular equation. And now what you will see is that your new ID will be nothing but, you just have to apply a binomial approximation over here. Your new ID will be nothing but 1 plus delta L by L times your old ID value. Correct. And now once you put this over here, this delta L by L is nothing but, we denoted it as lambda times VDS. Correct. This delta L by L is nothing but lambda times VDS. Why lambda times VDS? Because delta L will be higher if I apply a higher drain to source voltage. Correct. So that's why my the current will have one factor now called as 1 plus lambda VDS over here, which was in earlier cases not present, and that is why you are getting this slope now. Correct. So in the questions while solving the current equation of the MOSFET, if the channel length modulation has not been ignored, do not forget to take this equation into account. Okay. So now let me go back. So this was just a DIBL effect, that what we are saying is, since the channel length has been reduced now, the potential, the if you keep on increasing the value of VDS, the potential, the barrier, the depletion region at the drain to source side, it will start to have the effect on the energy band diagram at the source side as well, right? And it will actually shape the energy band diagram at the source side, and this is what you are seeing over here. Earlierly the energy band diagram was smooth, looking something like this. Correct. But since my channel length has now reduced to a very small value, now whatever VDS I will be applying, this depletion region around the drain side and the depletion region around the source side, they will start to interact with each other, and now you will get a effect called as the drain induced barrier lowering. Correct. Now the one more thing, what is the consequence of this drain induced barrier lowering? You lose the control over the channel. You lose the control over the channel. I mean, ideally you want all the control over the channel to come through the gate only. Correct. This drain to source potential is just to move the carriers which are present in the channel. So now instead of just having a control of the channel by the gate, you also have the control of the channel by the drain voltage over here, which is very bad, and you don't want that to happen. But unfortunately it happens. Correct. So this numerical was not important because the sir has not taught the concept of punch through voltage. Correct. So I don't expect this type of numerical to come in the exam. I guess we are done with this particular PPT. Yeah, we are done with this particular PPT. Let me just go to the next one. Again, please stop me at any point if you have doubts at any particular lecture number. Just tell me, I will just stop and re-explain the concept if you have any doubts. Just a minute. Yeah, so coming to this particular lecture, so now what we have done over here, we actually looked at the optoelectronic devices, correct? So now I will just skip the initial slides because we have looked at it at least 2 or 3 times. So now one important concept that we had studied was about the optical absorption. Correct. What did we say is that optical absorption is nothing but when you shine a light on the semiconductor, the electron from the valence band, it gets excited into the conduction band. Correct. And this is what we mean by the optical absorption, that the light energy is getting converted into the what you can say the electrical energy. If this h mu is greater than Eg, then the electron in the valence band edge will actually go to a higher energy level, and from there on it will come down to this lower energy level over here. Correct? Why is it coming down to lower energy level? Because always and always electron wants to come at a lower energy level. Correct? So this delta E that you are seeing over here, this will be dissipated as a heat in the lattice. Correct? So please remember this, and always remember, one photon will generate only one electron hole pair. Do not think that if the energy of the photon is much higher than the Eg, one photon can lead to 10 or 100 electron hole pairs. That does not happen. One photon usually only leads to one electron hole pair. Okay, what the energy, the extra energy will be dissipated as a heat in the lattice, and that electron will come down to the lower edge of the conduction band over here. Correct? Then we looked at the concept of photon flux. The photon flux was nothing but the number of photons that we are incidenting per unit time per unit area. Correct? So if I have this particular area of the semiconductor, correct? If I have this particular area, let's say this is W and let's say this is L. So in the area W into L, in 1 second, how many photons I am incidenting over this particular area? So this is what is represented by the photon flux, and this is number of photons now. So now if you multiply this with the energy of each photon, you will be getting a power density. You will be getting the power density of the light that you are shining. This is the photon flux. If you want to get to the intensity of the light, you have to multiply this with the energy of each photon, that is hc by lambda. Correct? And do not forget about the units. These are number of photons, that is per second per meter square, and the light intensity unit is nothing but watts per meter square. That is if you multiply this by hc by lambda over here. Correct? Now the photon absorption coefficient. So each material has certain absorption coefficient, that is how efficiently it is able to absorb the light. Correct? Higher is the absorption coefficient. What will happen is, if you keep on shining the light from this particular direction, if you have a very large value of alpha, most of the photons will be absorbed in a very short distance. Correct? So if I look at this particular x equal to x naught, you can see that the material having a large alpha value, a small whatever intensity I actually started with, correct, only a small part of is remaining at this particular distance. Whereas for a material which is having a smaller alpha, what you can see is that comparatively to this material, at least I have some higher intensity of light at this particular point. Correct? Now on what factor does this alpha depend? So obviously my photon energy, the light energy, should be higher than the band gap energy. That is what I have written over here, the photon energy and the band gap of the material. And it also depends on how efficiently the photon will be able to excite the electron from the valence band to conduction band. And now that depends on the nature of the material, whether my semiconductor is direct band gap or it is indirect band gap. Correct? So this absorption coefficient, if you look, then for the gallium arsenide or gallium phosphide or indium phosphide, this will be much higher than that of the silicon and germanium. Correct? And also, if the band gap of the material is lower, then you can also say that the absorption will be actually good for the same intensity of light. Correct? So this was the curve that sir must have told you, and I have also explained it to you. There were 3 questions that I had asked. Why there is a steep increase for the gallium arsenide and indium phosphide compared to silicon and germanium. On the x-axis, this curve is presenting the wavelength. On the y-axis, it is representing the absorption coefficient. Correct? Now, since gallium arsenide is a direct band gap material, you can see that this is the curve for the gallium arsenide. Correct? Just highlight the trace that I am highlighting. This is the curve for the gallium arsenide, and for the silicon, you can see the curve is actually something like this. So the increase is very steep in the gallium arsenide case because of the direct band gap nature. Correct? And why does the absorption coefficient increase with the decrease in the wavelength? Of course, C is nothing but hc by lambda. So as your lambda is decreasing, the energy of the light, the intensity of the light that you are shining, it is actually increasing. That is, energy of each photon is actually increasing, right? So if the energy of each photon increases, that means the intensity of the light is increasing. That means if the intensity of the light increases, there are more number of photons that are available now to get absorbed in the material now. Correct? So even if the energy band gap is, let's say, higher, and if you increase the hc by lambda from here, it is still capable of exciting the electron from the valence band to conduction band over here. Correct? So I hope that is very much clear. Now coming to the this formula, which is very important from the point of view of solving the numericals. This is nothing but the calculation of the generation rate. Correct? What did I tell you? Photon flux, right? Photon flux is nothing but the number of photons per meter square per second. Now, if I have a light having the intensity of IV of x, and if each photon has energy of hc by lambda, then the number of photons per second can be calculated by dividing these two numbers. Correct? This is what is telling you that this quantity IV of x upon hc by lambda is nothing but the number of photons per unit second that are being incidented, and how many of them will be getting absorbed will be determined by the absorption coefficient of the semiconductor material. Now this is the generation rate of electron hole pairs per centimeter cube per second. Correct? Now if I multiply this generation rate with the lifetime of the carriers, minority carriers, then I will get the excess carrier concentration that is coming because of the shining of light. And this formula is very important because some numericals will be there in front of us based on this formula. Correct? So now coming to the problem number 1, a photon flux with an intensity, just a minute, my screen is hanging. Just give me a minute. Yeah, I guess you are good to go in color blue. Yeah. So a photon flux with the intensity value IV0 and at a wavelength of 1 micrometer is incident on the surface of silicon. Assume absorption coefficient of silicon they have given at a particular wavelength. Note that the absorption coefficient is dependent on the wavelength. Why does this happen? Because energy of the photon changes with the lambda. Correct? And higher the energy of the photon, better is the probability that the photon will get absorbed properly. Correct? What is the steady state excess carrier concentration per centimeter cube if the excess minority carrier lifetime is 10 to the power minus 7 second? This is the generation rate that I have. If I just multiply it with the tau, correct, then I will get the excess carrier concentration. Now let me check. The value of tau has been given to me. Since the wavelength has been given to me, the value of h mu I know, the value of alpha also I know, and the value of this intensity has also been given to me. I just have to substitute everything into this equation and I will be able to get the answer. Correct? So hc by lambda is nothing but, you can see hc by lambda, how to calculate it. You just have to put hc into in the units of 1.24 electron volt, and lambda you have to put it in micrometers. Correct? So you got the value of 1.24, but since it is in electron volt, I have to convert it into normal scale, so I have to multiply it with the charge of electron. Correct? And that's how I got the generation rate. Alpha is my 100, IV of x is my 0.1, and now from here I got the value of generation rate. Once I've got the value of generation rate, I have to multiply it with the lifetime of the carrier, 10 to the power minus 7, and once I get this, then this is the concentration of the excess carriers that I will be generating within the semiconductor because of the shining of light. Correct? Now coming to the problem number 2. An n-type gallium arsenide sample has a minority carrier lifetime. They have given us into 10 to the power minus 7 second. Incident photons with the energy 1.65 electron volt generate an excess carrier concentration of 5 into 10 to the power 15 per centimeter cube at the surface of the semiconductor. So now they have given us the opposite information. They have given us the excess carrier concentration now over here. The first question they are asking, determine the incident power required. Now I will write the expression for the excess carrier concentration. It is nothing but generation rate into tau p. Generation rate value I already know over here, alpha IV of 0 divided by hc by lambda. Correct? So now what can I do over here? Correct? I have to find out the value of this IV. They are asking me to calculate determine the incident power required. That is this particular value. correct? So now h mu, that is hc by lambda value, has been given to me as 1.65 electron volt. The value of alpha is also given to me in this bracket, correct? Value of alpha has also been given to me in this bracket. The excess carrier concentration has also been given to me over here, correct? So from this I can easily find out the value of IV of 0, correct? I can easily find the value of IV of 0, and you will get the value of IV of 0 to be something like this. Now the next question they are asking me is, at what distance in the semiconductor does the generation rate drop to 10% of that at the surface? Correct. So first question that we should ask ourselves is, why generation rate is actually changing within the semiconductor material. Correct. So now what is the generation rate? Generation rate is nothing but your this particular formula. Correct. Since IV of x, correct, since IV of x changes within the semiconductor material as a exponential decay, correct, it changes as a exponential decay, even the generation rate is going to change as a exponential decay. Why it changes? See, first enough number of photons has to get absorbed first to generate the excess electrons, correct? If the number of photons getting absorbed is exponentially decaying with the distance, even the generation rate of those excess electrons and holes, even that is gonna get decayed exponentially, correct? So this is what I have written over here, correct? This is what I have written over here. Now the generation rate, just a minute, what they are asking, at what distance in the semiconductor does the generation rate drop to 10% of that of the surface, correct? So if I just have this g dash of 0, then this value has to drop to 10 by 100 times of g dash of 0, correct? Once you do this, then you have to take the log on both the sides, because our job is to find the value of x. At what distance does the generation rate drop to the 10% of the value, correct? Alpha I know over here, alpha value I already know, so that's why from here you will get the value of x from here easily, correct? So I hope that is clear. Now let's move on to the next gate question that had came up. So germanium sample of dimensions 1 cm cross 1 cm is illuminated with 20 milliwatt 600 nanometer laser light source as shown in the figure, correct? The illuminated sample surface has a 100 nanometer of lossless silicon dioxide layer, this layer, correct, that reflects 1/4 of the incident light. From the remaining light, 1/3 of the power is reflected from the silicon dioxide germanium interface, that is this particular interface, and 1/3 is absorbed in the germanium layer, and 1/3 is transmitted through the other side of the sample. So now what I will do, I will just draw the boundaries, correct, so that to make this question very simpler. This is nothing but silicon to air interface, silicon dioxide to air interface. What did they say is silicon dioxide layer that reflects 1/4 of the incident light. So if 1/4 of the incident light is getting reflected, that means 3/4 is getting transmitted now, correct? 20 milliwatt into 3 by 4 millivolt is now actually entering into the silicon dioxide layer, correct? Now from the remaining light, 1/3 of the power is reflected from the silicon dioxide to germanium interface. So this is my silicon dioxide to germanium interface. I am incidenting 20 into 3 by 4 milliwatt. Now 1/3 of this power will be getting reflected back, correct? And only the remaining power will be getting transmitted from this germanium to silicon dioxide interface, right? And now out of this power, out of this, correct, 2 by 3, 20 into 3 by 4 into 1 by 3 milliwatt is actually getting absorbed within the material itself, and other 1/3 power is getting transmitted through the other end of the germanium into the air, correct? Now what they are asking me, if the absorption coefficient of the germanium at 600 nanometer wavelength is 3 into 10 to the power 4 per centimeter and the band gap is just 0.66 electron volt, the thickness of the germanium layer rounded off to 3 decimal places is, see, I am injecting this much power into the germanium and I am just getting this much of the power from the other end. Remaining power is getting absorbed, correct? Now who is responsible for having this kind of decay? Of course we have studied that the IV of x decays exponentially within the semiconductor material. Correct? So what I have to do, this is my IV of 0, this is my IV of thickness T, correct, and then I have to apply this equation. What equation? IV of T is nothing but IV of 0 into e to the power minus alpha times T. Correct? Once you apply this equation, this is how this equation will be looking like. Correct? Equation number 3. Now you just have to substitute the values. You will be left with 0.5 is equal to e to the power minus alpha t. The value of alpha you already know because it has been given. Just take the log on both the sides. You will be able to find out the value of thickness over here. Correct? Please feel free to poke me at any point if you guys have any doubts. Okay? We will be closing out in next 3 to 4 minutes because I have not even given you the break. Right? So once this lecture is done, we will be just closing out. So now we have also studied a concept of spectral irradiance, and the spectral irradiance is nothing but, see, we have studied about the photon flux, right? These are nothing but the number of photons per unit area per second, but I didn't tell you at what wavelengths these photons are coming up. Correct? Now if you have a source which is giving you a light, it is of utmost importance to actually characterize how much power is actually there in per wavelength. So for example, if you look at the sunlight, what you are seeing on the y-axis is nothing but the photon flux, the intensity of the light per unit wavelength. What you are seeing is per intensity of the light per unit wavelength. Now why does this matter to us? You are seeing this watts per meter square per nanometer, that variation with respect to wavelength over here. Now why does this matter? Because our semiconductor material will not be able to absorb light from all the wavelengths. Correct? It will be able to absorb light only from the wavelengths. Correct? Only from the wavelengths which will be lesser than this. Only from this particular wavelengths it will be able to absorb the light. Correct? That's why it is of utmost importance for me to know the to know the distribution of the light intensity with respect to wavelength. Correct? So that's why we always look at the spectral irradiance, and now you will see its importance in the case of the solar cell. So now let me just quickly explain how the solar cell works. So now you are shining the light, correct? You are shining the light on top of the semiconductor. It is generating the electron hole pairs, correct? It is generating the electron hole pairs. Now the holes will move in the direction of the electric field in the depletion region, that is in this particular direction. Correct? So it will cause a current to flow in this particular direction. Since there is a load that is connected across a solar cell, maybe a light bulb or maybe a geyser or maybe something else, correct? So now this will cause a potential drop across this load, right? And this potential drop will now forward bias this PN junction. This potential drop now will forward bias the PN junction, and now it will cause a forward bias current to flow in the solar cell. So that's why you have a minus IL that is coming because of the incident light, and you have a forward bias current that is coming, and this is nothing but your total current in the solar cell. Now we define 2 points, one we called as a short circuit point and one we called as an open circuit point. For the short circuit point, you have to put V is equal to 0, that is there is no load that is connected, correct? So this is what we called as a short circuit point, and what you will get is your total current will be nothing but just minus IL, and this is what we call as a short circuit current. Note that short circuit current is nothing but the value of this IL. This IL is nothing but the photocurrent that is producing. I mean, see, this current is actually flowing because of the light that is incidented on the solar cell, correct? If you increase the intensity of the light, even this current is going to get increased proportionally, correct? Now the next we defined as something called as the open circuit point. Open circuit point is nothing but you make this current, you just open it, you make this current to be 0. Open circuit, right? Once you make this I total equal to 0, you will get an equation in terms of V, and we defined it as a open circuit voltage. This came out to be Kt by Q ln of 1 plus IL by IS. Correct? One more important thing to note is that this is first quadrant, this is second quadrant, this is third quadrant, and this is fourth quadrant. So the graph of the solar cell is actually in the fourth quadrant over here. Correct? It is coming at the fourth quadrant. So the significance, if you look at the product of V into I in this quadrant, it will come out to be negative. This power is not positive, the power is actually negative. That means it is actually generating the power, it is not consuming the power by itself. Correct? It is converting the energy from the light into the electrical energy. Right? So now, yeah, I have already explained this particular slide. Now, one more important thing to note is at what point to operate the solar cell at. Correct? So I want to I want to get the maximum power out of the solar cell possible. At the open circuit point, my voltage is maximum but my current is zero. At short circuit point, my current is maximum but my voltage is zero. There will be one optimum point where the product of Vm into Im will be maximum. Correct? That point can be found out from using this equation. You have to differentiate it. How you have to do it? First of all, you have to multiply this equation with V to get the power, and just do dp by dv equal to 0. You will get the maximum power point. Okay? And once you do this, you will be left with this particular equation. Correct? And this is not a linear equation, this is a transcendental equation, so you have to solve it very carefully using the numerical methods that you have studied, or you can use any software to solve it. Now, one thing that this point, it is difficult to measure. Correct? This point is actually difficult to measure, but I know the value of VOC and ISC. Correct? Now we defined one what you can say a metric called as the fill factor, and this is nothing but the ratio of this particular point Vm into Im upon VOC into ISC. Now why did we do this? Just imagine this like that. If I have a point like this, and if I join it to look something like this, and then if I take the area of this rectangle, it will fill out like this. If I join VOC and ISC, correct, then this rectangle will fill out this bigger area. What is the ratio of the area of these two rectangles? This is nothing but my fill factor. Correct? And now this fill factor will be extensively used in the numericals, so do not forget its formula. It is Vm into Im upon VOC into ISC. Correct? So I hope this is very much clear to you. Now one more important metric is how to find the efficiency of the solar cell. I am incidenting some power on the solar cell, and I am getting some power out of the solar cell. This P in is nothing but the intensity of the light, correct? And this P out is nothing but Vm times Im. Now since I have told you this Vm into Im is difficult to measure, we can write it in terms of fill factor, and the efficiency of the solar cell will be nothing but this particular formula. Fill factor into VOC into ISC divided by P. Correct? I hope this is very much clear. Now we will move on to some numericals quickly. This numerical came in GATE 2016. A solar cell illuminated uniformly with solar light of power 100 milliwatts per centimeter square. The solar cell has an area of 3 centimeters square and a fill factor of 0.7. The open circuit voltage is 0.5 volts and the short circuit current is 180 milliampere. The maximum efficiency of the device is correct. So how to get the how to get the efficiency of the device? So first of all, I have to get the product of Vm into Im. I have to divide it by P, and then I have to multiply it with the 100. Since I don't know the value of Vm into Im, but they have given me the value of short circuit current and the open circuit voltage. So I can use the fill factor formula, which is represented over here, to get the value of product of Vm into Im. Correct? Fill factor is known, VOC is given, ISC is given. You just solve it, you will get the product of Vm into Im. This will come out to be 0.063 watts. And what about the P? P has been given as this value, but it is 100 milliwatts per centimeter square. I have to multiply it with the area of the junction as well, right? Area of the solar cell as well. It has been given as 3 centimeters square. So the moment I multiply it, this term will become as 300 milliwatts. And this is what you are seeing over here. Correct? 300 milliwatts. So the moment you divide this with this particular term, you will be getting as efficiency close to 21%. Correct? I hope this is very much clear. Now let's move on to the next numerical that came in GATE 2018. A solar cell of area 1 centimeter square operating at 1 sun intensity. What is this 1 sun intensity? 1 sun intensity is nothing but 100 milliwatt per centimeter square. It has a short circuit current of 20 milliampere and an open circuit voltage of 0.65 volts. Assuming room temperature operation and thermal equivalent voltage of 26 millivolts, the open circuit voltage at 0.2 sun intensity is. So I have told you that the intensity, correct, IV of X that I am incidenting of the given light, correct, or P, now it is directly proportional to the short circuit current or the IL, that is the photo current. Correct, I have already explained you, it is of a linear proportion. Correct, now what I will do, I will, since they have given me the open circuit voltage, correct, they are also asking me the open circuit voltage also. So first of all I have to write a equation of open circuit voltage with respect to the photo current that I have. Correct, so I wrote this equation. Now for 1 sun intensity, my open circuit voltage is 0.65, correct, and I will just let these terms as it is. Correct, I will just write that IL at P is equal to 1 sun intensity, and I will just leave it as it is. Now at 0.2 sun intensity, what is going to happen? This photo current that you are seeing, even this is going to become 0.2 times. Correct, because it is directly proportional to the intensity. Now if I reduce the intensity by the factor of 5, even the photo current is going to reduce by the factor of 5. Correct, the moment I do that, correct, I will get this particular equation. Correct, I got this particular equation, and now what I will be doing now is I will write the equation for VOC at 0.2 sun intensity. Correct, so now I wrote 1 plus IL by IS, but IL at 0.2 sun intensity I can easily write it as 1 by 5 times IL at 1 sun intensity. Correct, this is what I have written over here, 0.2 into IL at 1 sun intensity divided by IS. Now what did I get from that? This term that you are seeing, it is usually much greater than 1, so I can easily ignore this term over here. Correct, so I got this particular equation from here. Now what I will be doing, since this is log of A into B, this is nothing but log of A into B, this is nothing but ln A plus ln B. Correct, so this is the one term that I will be keeping with me, and this is the another term that I have. So I will be just expanding over here. The moment you expand it, you got 0.026 ln 0.2 plus 0.026 times ln of IL by IS. Now this value is known to me now. See, this value is known to me because if you look at the previous equation, just look at this equation. This value has already been given to me as 0.65. Correct, so I will just substitute it as it is, 0.65, and you can just calculate this value from the calculator. You will get the open circuit voltage from here by just adding these two terms. Correct, I hope that is very much clear. Now coming to the photodiode, I won't go into a lot details. I just want to give you guys one just formula of the responsivity. Correct, so the responsivity, if you look, if it is not clear from here, the responsivity is nothing but the current in the photodiode is equal to efficiency into Q into P divided by H mu. Correct, this is one formula that I know. Correct, this is nothing but the efficiency. This is nothing but the efficiency, and if I want to calculate the responsivity will be nothing but given by this particular formula. This is nothing but the efficiency, and this is nothing but the responsivity. Correct, so the responsivity is nothing but this efficiency divided by 1.24 into lambda. Lambda will obviously in micrometers. Correct, now based on these two formulas, I just want to solve one quick numerical, and then we will wrap up the session. A photodiode has an area of 1 centimeter cross 1 centimeter and is illuminated by monochromatic light with a wavelength of 780 nanometer with a power density of 1000 watts per meter square. Area is given in centimeter square, this is given in meter square. We have to be very careful. Okay, so at 300 Kelvin, the open circuit voltage is 0.683 volts. What is the reverse saturation current, IS, in picoamperes, assuming 100% of the quantum efficiency? Now how will I get the reverse saturation current? See, how will I get the reverse saturation current? Open circuit voltage is given to me, so I will just write the formula for open circuit voltage as Vt into ln of 1 plus IL by IS. In this formula, IS is what they are asking me. So open circuit voltage is given to me. The Vt, it is nothing but Kt by Q. We can find it out. The only thing unknown is IL. The only thing unknown is IL, correct? Now, but they have given me one important information. Assume a 100% quantum efficiency. Now we have already seen that IL by Q is nothing but eta into Pn by Hv. Since eta is equal to 1 over here, I am only left with this particular equation. Q value I know, the Pn they have given to me 1000 watts per meter square. H mu I can easily calculate. This is nothing but Hc by lambda. Lambda has already been given to me. Correct? So I calculated Hc by lambda to be close to 1.589 electron volts. Pn has been given to me and the value of Q is also given. So I can easily find out the value of IL from here. Right? I can easily find out the value of IL from here. Right? And I just substituted it over here. Right? The IL will come out to be around 0.0629 amperes. And the moment you get this value, you just put it in this particular equation. Correct? So if you just put it in this particular equation, I have substituted open circuit voltage over here. I have substituted the value of IL over here. Only term unknown is IS. You have to divide this, then take the exponential on both the sides, correct? And then you just solve the value for the IS. The IS value will come out to be 0.228 picoamperes. Okay, so this was the last numerical for today, guys. Hopefully we were able to cover a lot of problems. I know I rushed through a little bit, but if you guys have any doubts, then please feel free to poke me. This was the last doubt solving session from my side for this particular course. I hope you enjoyed my doubt solving sessions. Sorry if anything, sorry if I had not taught anything properly. I had a great time interacting with you guys. So please feel free to poke me at any point and let me know if you guys have any doubts right now. We are already at 8 p.m. Any doubts till this particular point? Was there any problem, anything that you want me to repeat? Anything that you want to repeat or anything that you didn't understand in this particular lecture? This was just a revision kind of lecture. Last call for doubts. Any doubts? Okay, no doubts. Thanks a lot, guys, for staying here for 2 hours. Have a great evening and have a great weekend ahead. All the best for your exams, and I hope all of you will score really good marks. So thanks a lot for giving me an opportunity to interact with you and to be able to teach you some problems, and I hope you enjoyed the sessions. Thanks a lot, guys. Take care. See you in the next semester. Bye bye. Welcome.